Temple Grandin, what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm an animal science professor at Colorado State University. I teach a course in livestock handling. The other thing I do is consult with the meat industry and the cattle industry and the pork industry on animal handling. And I work with big companies like McDonald's to implement their animal welfare auditing programs.
How did you get there?
Well, it started out one little job at a time. I started out in Arizona visiting all the feed yards, and it was freelance, typical freelance kind of thing. Before I was a professor, you start out one little project at a time and then build up your business. And then after I'd been out in the industry for about 10 years, I went back to school to get my PhD when the economy was kind of down. It took me a while because I was still consulting, still doing lots of speaking engagements on cattle and pig handling.
Why is it important that we know how animals think?
Well, when I first started out in the industry, one of the first things I had to figure out, since I work with the meat industry, is I had to figure out, do cattle know they're going to get slaughtered? So I'd go over to this Swift plant in Arizona. It was the early 70s. And then I'd go over to a feed yard. While they're being vaccinated, they behave the same way in both places. And now scientists know that animals definitely can feel pain. And in my book, Animals in Translation, I talk about animal thinking. There's a lot of research now that shows that animals do have thinking, the ability to solve problems under new conditions. But their thinking is sensory-based, not language-based. See, as an autistic person, I think in pictures. I don't think in language. Language narrates the pictures in my imagination. It's a sensory world. I mean, think about how much the dog learns when he visits the local fire hydrant. He knows who's been there, how long ago they were there, are they friend or foe? It's all sensory-based detail.
But again, why is that important for us as consumers of meat to know how animals are thinking?
Well, we want to make sure that we give animals a good life. In Animals Make Us a Human, I talk about what does an animal really want. Pigs want things to manipulate and root in. It's really important to give pigs some fibrous material to root in. Dogs, they need a social life. They need to be socially interacting with people. Each animal has different things that are more important to it. Now, of course, animal cognition is not the level of human cognition, but I was just reading in the New York Times today that, there are some dogs know that they will understand over 200 nouns.
Temple Grandin is our guest this week on In Depth. And if you would like to dial in, you can call in at 202-737-0001. If you live in the East and Central time zones, 202-737-0002. For those of you in the Mountain and Pacific time zones, you can send us an email, booktv@cspan.org, or you can tweet us at booktv is our Twitter address. What do you mean when you say you think in pictures?
Well, all my thoughts come up as pictures. It's sort of like Google for images. Instead of asking me an abstract question like thinking in pictures and then I see the cover of my book, why don't you pretend I'm Google for images and give me a keyword? Don't give me house or car, because most people can visualize that, and don't give me something I can see in the TV studio, like control room or something like that. Just give me a noun and I'll tell you how my mind searches the database.
C-SPAN.
C-SPAN, I'm seeing my hotel room. I got the TV on this morning and I was watching C-SPAN. But the TV wouldn't turn off and I had some other work I had to do. So now I'm seeing the remote control and I'm pushing all the buttons, and that's how I got from C-SPAN to TV remote control. And I had to call the desk to get the remote control work. Now I'm into like hotel hassle file.
Corral.
Corral, I'm now starting to see many of the facilities that I've designed. They just start coming up like slides. Now, corral tends to be ranch facilities, so I'm seeing ranch facilities. You'd ask me, feedlot facilities, I start to see things I designed in the feedlots. If you said meat plant, I start seeing facilities I designed at the meat plant. Now, since that's something that's my business, I'm going to tend to see my own stuff. Why don't you ask me something that would not be my business?
Book.
I'm seeing them, and they're in the room. You're not being very creative in what you're asking.
I didn't know I was going to be put on the spot.
I'm surrounded. Yeah, but you see, but the only way that I can explain to you
Right.
how I think is I've got to show you how it's associative thinking. And it kind of gets off the subject the same way that a search does on the internet. Even when you do a verbal search, a word-based search, maybe the first 2 pages are hits around the subject, and then it gradually gets off the subject. But it's associative.
How many people in the U.S. think like that?
Well, there are other people that are visual thinkers that aren't necessarily autistic. I mean, a lot of dyslexic people, a lot of just really good graphic design art people. But one thing where I'm more extreme is when I design a piece of equipment and draw a drawing, I can actually test run it in my head like a virtual reality computer system. I thought every other designer could do that, but I found out they couldn't. And when I wrote Thinking in Pictures, I interviewed people about how they think, and I was shocked to find out that most other people didn't think the way I do. Like, for example, if I say, think about a church steeple, I just see specific ones. I can name where they're located. They come up like specific slides. I put them in the church steeple file. Other people were getting this vague, generalized image. I don't have any vague, generalized image. I only have specific ones.
You, in Thinking in Pictures, Dr. Grandin, you talk about 3 different types of thinkers. What are those 3 different types of thinkers?
Well, when I first wrote Thinking in Pictures, I thought that everybody on the autism spectrum was a visual thinker like me. Well, I found out that's not true. So in the revised edition in 2006, I've changed that. And I found by interviewing a lot of people that are on the spectrum, there's kind of 3 basic thinking types. The thing about the autistic mind, or the Asperger mind, that's just the mild variation of autism, is it's a specialist mind. Strong in one area, bad in another area. Now, the visual thinkers like me think in photorealistic pictures. Think Google for pictures. Where we're really bad is in things like algebra. Algebra was impossible because there was nothing to visualize. I never got to try geometry or trig. But I've talked to other people that skipped algebra, went to geometry and trig, and they could do that just fine because there's more to visualize. The second type of mind is the pattern thinker. They think in patterns. It's like a more abstract visual thinking. Think of origami, think chess, it's patterns. And these are your music and math minds. Music and math is often their strong area. And they're often going to be weak in reading comprehension and writing composition. And the third type is a word specialist. Some of these people that are on the spectrum, they'd make good news broadcasters, reporters. They know every fact about their favorite subject. And they're just so-so in math. And I have found over and over again kind of these 3 different thinking types. It's not always exact. You can get mixtures of them. But it's always been interesting for me to talk to how other people think. I found about 3 people that have absolutely no visual thinking. Like if I say to you, in your mind, visualize walking into your house or getting in your own car, most people can visualize that. I have found 3 people that could not do that.
How do you define autism?
Well, I define it as a developmental disorder that varies from genius like Einstein, who'd be diagnosed autistic today, all the way to people that are going to remain nonverbal. It's very, very variable. It's a continuous disorder. Asperger's is just a milder variant where there's no speech delay. And, when does geek and nerd become Asperger? There's no black and white dividing line. And if you didn't have a lot of people around with Asperger traits, this studio wouldn't even exist because he wouldn't have all these technical things. People on the spectrum are more interested in things than they are in socializing with people.
When were you diagnosed with autism?
Well, I was born in 1947. So, 1949, I was taken into a neurologist in Boston. They wanted to make sure I wasn't deaf, so they checked that. Didn't have epilepsy, checked that. And the neurologist didn't know what autism was at the hospital, so they just said I was brain damaged. And then a few years later, when people knew about autism, then I got the autism diagnosis. You got to remember, it's a long time ago. I'm 62 years old.
Who is Leo Kanner?
Leo Kanner was one of the first people to identify what autism was. And I've read his original papers. They were published prior to 1947, but back in those days, no internet or anything. A lot of journal articles didn't get put around very far.
And has the definition of autism changed over the years?
Well, not really. You see, the problem you've got with something like autism or even dyslexia is it's a behavioral profile. I mean, when I was a little kid, they used to think it was an emotional problem, like emotions caused it. No, it's something a child is born with. A lot has been learned scientifically about it. There's abnormalities in brain development. And one of the big places where you have the abnormalities is the white matter in the brain. White matter is the inter-office communications in your brain. See, half your brain's white matter, the other half is gray matter.